Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in-game as well. So I want to apologise for the change in setup here, maybe a little bit of difference in the audio as well. The room that I usually record my videos in is actually being occupied by a guest, a friend of ours during this COVID-19 lockdown. So today we are recording from my office, which means the acoustics might be slightly different. I don't know if that'll be noticeable or not, but either way, if it is in any way disruptive, then that's your reason. And there's not much that I can do about it. But aside from our change of locale, there is no change to the concept of this week's Monster Monday. It's another one of your suggestions that you've left for me down in the comment section below. So if, like this person who suggested today's video, you have a monster you'd really like to see me draw or talk about or illustrate, whether it's in any D&D book, supplement, or even things like Kobold Press, maybe even a monster that doesn't exist in D&D just now, has existed in a previous edition perhaps, or just a monster from mythology that you'd really like to hear me explore and talk about the lore and mythology of, and maybe write up some stats for so that you can use it in your D&D campaign, make sure to leave that down below. Because once you've made your suggestion, no matter what it is, I'll always group them together into my to-draw list, which I hand over to my patrons every month over on Patreon, and they all vote on which ones of those monsters that you've suggested, and their votes get tallied up, and that basically explains how we cover which monsters in what order, and every patron gets an equal vote. So this week, my patrons have voted to see Kenkus, a really popularly suggested creature, which is originally suggested to me by Jack McFadden Finlayson. So thank you so much for your suggestion, Jack, and thank you to my patrons for voting for this week's monster, because all of you guys, and me, I'll be honest, we've all been really eager to draw and talk about this monster. So let's get started with today's video. So I was a tiny bit hesitant actually to put these guys in a Monster Monday, because they're also a playable species, and I really want to dedicate some time to doing a playable species deep dive, or a series of videos where I talk about kind of ideal ways to world build and how to play these characters in more depth, what they might look like, what the intricacies of their life might be like. But they were first introduced in 5th edition as a monster rather than a playable race, so I still think that kind of counts. And you guys have been so eager suggesting this so regularly that it seems only fair that we should cover this in both types. But the first of which is definitely going to be today's Monster Monday video, and I can't really pass up the opportunity to draw some bird people anyway, so here we are. Now I'm not 100% sure, but my research indicates that Kenkus first appeared in D&D through 1st edition's Fiend Folio, which was published in 1981, where they much more closely resembled modern versions of the Arakoa. They were depicted as a kind of peregrine falcon or eagle-like creature with 2 legs, 2 arms, and a further 2 set of limbs, which took the form of a pair of wings on their backs. Now interestingly, in my own homebrew campaign, I like to lump together the Arakoa and the Kenku, as well as another avian species, and I give them an umbrella term known as the avialari, which is, I suppose, kind of the same as just saying elves as opposed to high elves, wood elves, or dark elves, and so on. I'd be intrigued to know if you guys do the same, whether the Kenku in your universe were once the Arakoa, or if Arakoa are Kenku that learned to fly, or if there's some other brilliant bit of homebrew imagining that you've put into your campaigns. Always love hearing about your ideas, so make sure to leave some of that in the comments section if you have an interesting reason why your Kenku might be connected to other creatures, or if they're more like the D&D version. But since their original 1st edition Arakoa-like appearance, the Kenku have been separated from their other avian humanoid cousins, appearing as purely flightless, crow-like, for the most part, bird people. Now you'll see as this illustration goes on that I'm actually not going down the crow route with mine. I'm basing my Kenku here on a pigeon or a collared dove. Now hopefully I'll get around to talking about that a little bit more later on and my reasons for doing that. But anyway, the name Kenku seems to be a kind of plagiarism-free revision of the Japanese yokai, or spirit being, known as the Tengu, taken from the Chinese word tiangao, meaning heavenly dog. In Chinese mythology, these flying black dogs were thought to chase the sun or the moon like a ball, and it was their deepest desire to eat them, kind of like how in Norse mythology Fenrir, the child of Loki, who brings about Ragnarok, the end of the Norse world, starts this process by devouring the sun. Fenrir the massive wolf is replaced by a smaller shadow hound in this Chinese retelling, or Chinese utterly separate imagining, and their devouring of this heavenly body rather than the end of the world is said to represent an eclipse. It's also believed that the appearance of the Tiangao might represent ancient interpretations of meteors or comets flying through the sky. It's a glowing body shooting through the sky with a black core. When the stories of these sky dogs travelled with settlers in Japan, however, these flying black dogs became humanoid birds of prey, and although many were seen to have beaks and talons, just as many were depicted as normal humans with long beak-like noses and other bird-like features, but not explicitly being covered in feathers and so on. As spiritual yokai, these creatures were endowed with strange and unexplainable magics, which usually saw them fill the role of tricksters or troublemakers who were often duped and deceived in Japanese folklore, which is kind of slightly how they appear in D&D as well. In some stories, Tengu have mystical fans that can shrink or grow people's noses to be more beak-like, and they carry cloaks that turn themselves invisible. And it's these items in specific which usually a Tengu was tricked out of by a wily and cunning human. Now, compared to the Japanese Tengu, or at least their more bird-like depictions of the Tengu, Kenkus in D&D are not strikingly different in appearance. They're 5 to 6 foot crow-like humanoids usually, and although they like to cause trouble for would-be adventurers, just like their folklore interpretations, their lives and personalities are usually quite different from mythological interpretations. The most immediately noticeable feature of the Kenku is their ability, or rather requirement, to mimic or reproduce sounds that they've heard in order to communicate. We're told that although they understand Common and Auran, the elemental language of air, they can't actually speak without mimicking existing sounds that they play back like a dictaphone. In the Monster Manual, in a section known as Speech in Pantomime, we are told, and I quote, "Kenku can mimic the sound of anything they hear. A Kenku asking for money might make the sound of coins clinking together, and a Kenku referring to a busy marketplace can reproduce the cacophony of hawking vendors, barking dogs, bleating sheep, and the cries of street urchins. When mimicking voices, they can only repeat words and phrases that they have heard, not create new sentences. To converse with a Kenku is to witness a performance of imitated sounds, an almost nonsensical verse. Kenku speak to one another in much the same way. Because they are adept in interpreting one another's glances and gestures, the sounds they make to communicate complex ideas or emotions can be succinct. Groups of Kenku also develop secret codes. For example, a cat's meow might be a secret code for prepare to attack, or flee for your lives. Their talent for mimicry extends to handwriting, and criminal organizations often employ Kenku to forge documents. When a Kenku commits a crime, it might forge evidence to implicate another creature. This mimicry is also represented in player characters who choose to roll up a Kenku to play, where they can, again, only speak through recorded sounds, much to the annoyance of other players at the table, I would imagine. I've never actually had a Kenku in one of my campaigns. I kind of hope I get one though. Could be really interesting. I've heard some of you guys who have played them before like to write down lists of phrases that you hear on the campaign. And I've never quite known whether or not if someone who's playing one of these characters starts the game afresh as if they've never heard anything with their Kenku character and therefore can only communicate with phrases that they hear other players say, or if they come with an inbuilt body of sounds that they might be able to reproduce. It might be a really interesting idea for a player to carry around an actual dictaphone or a soundboard so that rather than role-playing in their own voice, they might literally record and play back something that another character has said. I've actually included Kenkus in one of my campaigns as a set of deadly assassins, not in the kind of skulking and deceptive way that they tend to be, but I had my Kenkus known as the 3 Kenkus. They were kind of famous, or infamous I guess, who had each memorized different forms of music and could replay them at such volumes as to cause massive thunderous damage. One of them in particular had memorized a lot of sort of dubstep songs, and playing them back at a certain frequency caused reality to warp and disintegrate. I made these guys terrifying boss monsters whose influence on sound waves could shake the fabric of magic. When bass drops, so would gravity. When a song rewound, so would time, and so on. They're really fun creatures to use for their mimicking abilities, whether in a minor or in a major way. Now you can tell that these sounds that they produce are recorded and imitated rather than an organic sound through a successful insight check, but they can be really devious for traps. The Monster Manual even tells you that if you ever hear a baby crying in an alley, you should walk the other way, according to city guards of the watch at Waterdeep. Now, although parrots are famously the birds which we associate with mimicking human speech, this is only because they're the most likely to be held in captivity as pets and are therefore very likely to pick up human sounds, or other sounds that we're familiar with, because we're in such proximity with them and they're in such proximity with us. Corvids, the family of birds that include crows and ravens, are also very well known for imitating speech, which is why Kenkus are traditionally depicted as crows, or crow-like humanoids, I guess. Birds don't actually have vocal folds, as mammals do, and so don't quite exactly produce human noises the way that we might expect. They don't know these words. They don't produce them as words as we would. Instead, they have what's known as a syrinx, which gets its name from the Greek word for panpipes. If you were to look at the anatomy of a crow or one of these other corvids, you'd see that these kind of pipes resemble a wishbone-like structure, an upside-down letter Y perhaps, which a corvid forces air through as it tightens muscles and causes contractions to generate approximations of a human's vocal range. Many people who adopt crows as pets, or live very close to a lot of them, believe that in order to train them to speak, they need to bifurcate or cut their tongues in half in order to allow them to produce this kind of fricative S sounds that we use so frequently in human speech, but thankfully this is not true. Birds can in fact very easily produce these sounds by widening and closing the aperture of their beaks as they pass air through them. Perhaps owing to inspiration from magpies or other members of the Corvidae family, the myth surrounding their desire to steal shiny objects and things like that, Kenkus have been branded as thieves and scavengers, or perhaps even as muggers. Interestingly, a magpie's propensity to steal shiny objects to hoard in their nests is largely a fiction and has been disproven according to studies in 2014, and may instead actually shy away from them, fearing these unknown items to be potentially dangerous. Now, this fear is definitely not something shared by the Kenku, however. In a passage called Fallen Flocks in the Monster Manual, we're told that the Kenku wear ill-fitting cloaks, robes, and rags. These garments cover the soft, sleek feathers of their body, shrouding their bare arms and legs. They tread lightly when they walk, on talons made for grasping the branches of trees and seizing prey from the lofty skies. Soft as the wind they move, so as not to draw attention to their shameful forms. Once, the Kenku held the wind in their wings, embracing the gusty sky and singing the sweet language of birdsong, serving a master whose identity is now lost to their memory. The Kenku coveted the glittering baubles of his household and longed to speak so that they cajole and swindle others out of such treasures. Stealing the secret of speech from a volume in their master's library, they disguised themselves in rags to beg for pretty things. When their master learned of their greed, he stripped away their wings as punishment, forcing them to beg forever. Their tattered robes, their muddy and grim appearance, their life confined to being beggars, the life of a street urchin, a life of greed. We're told that they're often used as spies or as servants to wizards and scholars because they're so good at memorizing details and reciting information, but aside from these lofty aims that a Kenku might dream for, players will most likely encounter them as a bandit of some kind. Now, due to the fact that Corvids are not that actually interested in shiny things, in perhaps gems, and in the D&D case, gold, I decided to illustrate my Kenku here as a pigeon. Now, admittedly, obviously pigeons can't replicate sounds, so a crow or a parrot Kenku might be a better fit. But there's something about the squalid lives that they live, the fact that they're constantly tied to cities and towns, something I don't see too many crows in a city. Your city may be different. But what I see an absolute ton of throughout my whole life, living in England and living in Scotland, are pigeons, absolutely everywhere. They're known as rats with wings. They litter the streets of every city in Britain. They eat scraps, they eat garbage, and they are often avoided. People literally shun them and try and walk away from them in case they're disease-carrying in some capacity. And so I felt like drawing a Kenku as a pigeon seemed to fit how they are judged, how they live their lives in D&D. And also because, once you've drawn a crow person, that's, crows look very similar. You've all seen illustrations of Kenku out there, and I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. So in my homebrew sort of steampunky campaign, I'm definitely going to litter my capital city with pigeon-based Kenku, as well as the other flavors that are out there. So I hope you enjoyed my interpretation, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about the Kenku today. If you ever used a Kenku before, make sure to let me know down in the comment section, because I love hearing about your characters, or if you're a DM, what's the most fun way that you've used a Kenku in your campaign? If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to leave a little thumbs up, a little like down below, so that YouTube can know if I'm doing a good job. Perhaps favorite this and share it with some communities that you're a part of, maybe your own D&D party. because we are only little hatchlings ourselves. I dream of one day reaching 100,000 subscribers on this channel, but that's a very, very far way away. I would really like your help to do that. So if you're feeling generous, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and share with a few people. Get the word out about the channel, because that would absolutely make my whole life. If you want to support the channel in a financial way and actually help me make these videos, that would be wonderful as well. I have a Patreon page where backers get copies of this illustration and all other illustrations that I do. We can have one-on-one chats. You get to vote on all of these Monster Mondays and other little rewards. So thank you very, very much if you choose to check that out. But until next time, make sure to be generous to your Kenku friends out there. They might have had a very, very hard life being cursed by their deity and living the life of a street urchin. But also maybe make sure that you trust them before you wander around covered in all of your valuables and bling. And happy monster hunting.